welcome. We are here to talk about getting press for your small business. And I wanted to start with introductions. We're actually missing one of our panel members, so if anyone's seen Laura Zander, please send her over this way. She hopefully will meet up with us soon. I'm Sunni Scrivner, and I'm the owner of Yarn in Eureka, California. It's a yarn store, obviously. I opened in the fall of 2008. I'm also the founder and co-organizer of the Have a Ball Fall Crawl, which is an annual virtual yarn crawl that includes 36 different shops from around North America. I'm also a mom of 2 teenage boys and a Siamese cat and 4 chickens. This is Lisa Chamoff, who runs India Untangled, a marketplace, online shop, and event series that promotes and partners with yarn dyers, pattern designers, and crafters of knitting-related accessories. Lisa has a background in journalism and still writes about home design, real estate, and healthcare as a freelancer. And Sandra Chandler's quilt journey started over 30 years ago, and she continues to be inspired by the myriad of fabrics and techniques learned over time. She's a passionate teacher who encourages students to create unique fabric creations, whether the end product is a quilt or a garment. Her core materials for quilting are thread and fabric. However, she often employs recycled denim, yarns, dyed fabrics, and stamps to transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. Sandra holds a BS in clothing, textiles, and design from Arizona State University in Tempe, Arizona. And then Laura Zander, if she joins us, is the co-owner of Jimmy Bean's Wool. Laura, along with her husband Doug, started the business, which has been named 4 times to the Inc. 5,000 fastest growing private companies in the U.S. list. There she is, with a $30,000 personal investment, and have since grown it debt-free to become a booming operation. Laura is one of Ernst & Young's entrepreneurial winning women and was invited to the White House for a forum addressing the American Jobs Act, where Jimmy Bean's Wool was recognized as a notable Nevada business. Known as an innovator in the needle arts industry,
You're right on time.
Laura has created successful national high-profile campaigns, Stitch Red, Stitch Mountain, and Beans for Brains, which focus on heart disease awareness, winter sports with a tie-in to Olympic athletes, and higher education for students. In 2018, Jimmy Bean's Wool expanded its operations to include Della Q, a line of cases and bags made for makers, and again in 2019, Laura and Doug purchased Madeline Tosh, a hand-dyed yarn company. So welcome to the panel. Thank you all for being here. So we're going to talk about getting press for your business. And when we met to talk about this topic, I was kind of surprised by the first answer to the question that I asked, which was about press releases. So I asked, like, how, what's your ideas about how to write a press release or where to get, ideas for that? And I was surprised by the answer. So let's talk about that. So actually, we'll start with Lisa. And what do you think about press releases?
So as a journalist, I still work as a freelance writer. I get a lot of pitches emailed to me, and I welcome them. I think it's great. As a writer, I'm always looking for ideas. And I would say, so my response was that press releases were unnecessary. So I'll with a caveat that in some cases you can use them. But if you're pitching a writer, so a newspaper journalist or a magazine writer, it's always better to personalize your communication with them. So if you'd like them to write a feature article about your business, you have a really great brand story, I would skip the press release and just write a really good introduction email. If you're running an event that has some details about date and time and particulars, you can write a press release for that. But if you're just seeking out press for your brand or specific products, I would say just research the person that you're contacting and put more time and effort into the initial message you're sending them. Because writers are very busy, they get a lot of requests in their inbox, and So you just have like a few sentences to hook their attention. So if you spend time writing a press release, making sure it's in like the proper format, I think you'll kind of lose the hook that you want to give them.
Yeah, I was surprised by that answer, actually, and I think it's great, though. Like, it makes sense to make a personal connection with somebody rather than just kind of sending out a blanket press release. But, so Laura, you do actually use a press release, but you had an interesting way that you use it. So can you share about that?
Sure. We agreed with Lisa, so when there's something that we want some press on, we focus on the subject line of the email, and I don't know if that really works, so maybe you can tell me if that helps, but trying to make it really interesting, like what can I write that'll make her open the email and actually read it, and keep things very simple. But we actually use press releases, one, to like clarify our thoughts and our own thought processes, so it's almost, and I've read before, like before you build a product, before you create a new kit, before you create an event, write the press release first to make sure that your event is press worthy, before you actually go through everything. I think this is a Bezos tactic that I adopted way before him. So I got one up on him. But before you build a product, you got to be able to defend it and make sure that it's press worthy before you even decide to build it. But the other reason that we use it, more so than just clarifying our thought process and trying to whittle down like what our purpose is and everything, is for search engine results. So every time we write a press release, we make sure that we load the press release with keywords that are important. So whether it's yarn, it's knitting, as an example, I mean, this was 15 years ago, but we got the opportunity to teach a bunch of celebrities how to knit in LA before the Emmys. And so I wrote a press release that had like celebrity knitting, male knitters, blah, 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 blah. And then we posted on our website. We don't really expect anybody to read these, but as it turns out, some journalists did a Google search, and because somebody was going to write about celebrity knitting, they typed in celebrity knitting, they found our press release, and then they found us, and then they reached out to us for some interview questions on that. So it just kind of serves a double purpose, and maybe the fruit doesn't appear for a couple years, but it's a nice way to just build some credibility with Google and build some credibility with journalists.
Yeah, I thought that was such a great idea. I would have never thought to put the press release on my website. It wouldn't have occurred to me, so it's such a great idea. So, and Sandra, what about you? What do you think about press release, no press release?
So I agree with you on when it's out there in social media. So I've had press releases written about me and different things I've done or different magazines I've been in, and it does come up on the search as far as search engines. And when people do, so I've never done a press release on myself or something I've done, but I've had press releases done on events that I've been involved in. And it definitely helps you move up on the search engine. My biggest thing was when I first started in the industry, when we became, social media people, was Google your name. And if you're not coming up, you need to make sure you come up.
Yeah.
So press releases, anything that's out there social media wise, and the more you get, more that's out there, the more you're going to come up.
Yeah.
And so if you Google my name, my name Sandra Lee is what I go by. It comes up and I'm the first pictures. And then there's other people that go by that,
and hopefully they're good pictures.
Right? Never put a picture out there that you don't want others to see. So a couple times I've been at conferences and I thought I was looking cute, and I wasn't, and I burned those clothes. But yes, make sure that when you do have anything, you want to make sure that is what you want to look like, or that what you want to present. Even your work, I really watch what work I present, because it floats out there.
Yep.
So in your press releases, you can tell them too what picture you want first. So when it Googles, because it's not going to pull up everything. It's going to pull up the top stuff. It's going to come until they search it. So I definitely think press releases are good for social media purposes and for getting your name out there.
Yeah, again, it's so interesting. I wouldn't have thought, I thought of a press release as just something that you send out to the local newspapers and tell them about your event. So it's so interesting that there are these other ways that it's useful and that it pops up. So yeah, those are great. Does anyone have any questions about press releases or what they are even? It's generally, I should have said that first. It's generally just like what you're, who, what, where, why, when, like just the general information, and then like a short description. So just in case you weren't sure what they are. Okay. So let's talk about what types of things like shop owners might want to get press about, if you have ideas about that. So let's start this time with Sandra.
Okay, so for me, I always feel like earlier is better than late. Marketers usually show us something or tell us about something 2, 3, 4 times before you actually read it and it sinks in. So I feel like as a shop owner, if you have somebody coming or an event coming up, you could always put it on a schedule, which I think is really good, because again, you're stacking that social media platform. So if it's 4 months out, and most of the people that I work with, they're like, okay, yeah, we're gonna start advertising it 4 months out. I noticed that crafters and creative people are the type of people that book things 6 months, a year out. If you wanna get that dollar, because they have so much expendable income, you want to get on their calendar. So you need to tell them about it, remind them about it,
and again,
tell them about it again. And you can and what you do is, what I've seen effective is you tell them about it, and then you take another little piece, nugget, and you keep that same heading, and you add that nugget. So each time they're getting a little deeper and deeper.
It's brilliant.
And that's what I've seen work really, really well. And then you always do a countdown. Because I don't know about y'all, but when they have a countdown, I'm like, oh, shoot.
Yeah.
Oh, no. All of a sudden, it's
Last
like, hold
spot.
on.
Yeah.
Wait, if I want to do this. And countdowns work because it makes people then make it a priority. If it's just a calendar date, I'm good. But if you're like 20 days left, doesn't 20 days sound like not very much?
Yeah. Right.
And and it's almost like a call to action, but really you're not making them. You're just saying, you only got 20 days left.
It's on you.
Yeah, exactly. It's on you.
I'm just saying.
If you miss out,
20 days.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's what I
It's
said.
a good one.
So what do you think, Laura? Like other things that people should try to get press about? Like,
I like to. I don't know. Is anybody here ADHD, OCD, any Ds? Any Ds? No Ds? I'm the only D? You're a D? Great. Well, so anyway, people like us, I constantly need like new things, new challenges. I need to stretch, apparently, my creative brain. And so I don't want to just go to the local news or go to the local paper and come up with, hey, we're having a knitting class, and this famous knitter is going to be here. I try to come up with really creative, interesting things. Like one time the TV station came because our local post office was thinking about cutting the hours of the post office. And so we had something to say about how that was going to affect the shipments that we were sending out and how knitters around the world were going to be affected by, packages not going out on a Sunday, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's some really interesting, there have to be ways that you're interacting with your community that you can get local news. We talked about this in an earlier panel, but, most of our knitters are gardeners. They love to read. They love, to volunteer. They love to knit for charity. Like, there's so many different story angles that because you live it and breathe it every single day, you may not think it's newsworthy, but to a newscaster, at least the ones that I've talked to, they're hungry for something interesting. And yarn is colorful, and it's pretty, and it's kind of safe, it's like politically neutral. There are all these great reasons, in theory, there are all these great reasons that a news station or the local paper would love to come and get visuals of your shop. And it often doesn't have to be about knitting. It might be about your business. It could be, we just had the station come because it was we bought a building for the first time. It's been 20 years. We bought a building and they came and did a story on it. you know, or we had a birthday party and they came and did a story on it, you know, and so just getting really, really creative about, one time we had Angora bunnies at the shop, you know, and so we had like a come pet bunnies and whatever, and we were able to get the news stations there, because, I mean, who doesn't love bunnies? You know? And
yeah, I think the things that we do are way more interesting than we realize. Like, it's unusual to people who aren't in our industry or in our world. Like, they don't realize, like, you know, so, yeah.
And like, you know, as an example is, hey, I mean, who does volunteer stuff? You know, have you guys, anybody like knit for charity? I mean, there you go, right there. Hey, we just brought 40 women together and they all contributed squares to an Afghan, and why don't you come do a news story and watch us sew them together and show how we're warming up the community. I mean, there's, you know, throw something at me and I bet you I can come up with a story. I've got all, you know.
Yeah, I would even say also look at who your customers are. I mean, I'm part of you know, a knitting community and just wonderful women, people, and they have great stories themselves, especially also how crafting has impacted their lives. I mean, pretty much everyone has a story of how knitting, crocheting, and quilting has just saved them and lifted their spirits, I mean, especially during the pandemic. So if you have, you could even pitch a story to local or even national media about how crafting has helped people's mental health during the pandemic, how it continues to, you know, people who took up the hobby during lockdown, and how you continue to serve them. Obviously, you know, consult with them first before pitching their story. But if they're amenable to that, that's a great way to pitch crafting and get more people involved in, because everybody wants that hobby. You know, people are always looking for hobbies. I hear so much from people who are like, you know, all I do is work. So yeah. That's a great.
I love that. That just gave me an idea, actually, because what I noticed, and probably a lot of you who have shops, like when we were shut down and we couldn't have people coming in the store, like I saw my customers' mental health like plummeting. Like some of my customers who are knitting groups were their social time. That's when they came and saw other people, and all of a sudden they didn't have that. Now that we're meeting again, I'm seeing improvement, and so I didn't even think about it, but that would be a really good story to tell, that like, wow, you know, just gathering once a week and knitting together is improving people's lives, and it really does make a difference, which is, you know, why we're, you know, for me, it's like why I'm doing this. It's not just about selling yarn, but, you know, it's creating that community, so.
I have a suggestion. So I'm a mom of 4. My children are all grown, but back in the day, if you have children involved, not only do you get the children, but you get at least one other parent.
Yep.
So if you want to bring focus to your store, and if you want to possibly reach outside of your local quilters, sewers, knitters, have an event for a Girl Scout troop, a Boy Scout troop.
Right.
Have an event when those organizations are always looking for platforms, because the children and the young adults are always trying to win a badge or earn a badge or, you know, make some, and the high school is also another place. High schools, middle schools, they're always looking for either fundraisers or a place to gather. Those are places that you get the kid and you get the parent, the grandparent, because everybody thinks their kid is special. They're all the next, you know, president. So when you involve your young people, I've seen how you get foot traffic that you may not, they may have walked through your store, past your store 100 times. But you get them in that door, and we all know the minute you get them in that door, either they're going to spark their creative interest, or that kid's going to say, Mom, can I? And how long does it take before that mom eventually signs that child up? And I would always have some type of class that they could sign up for, or something that the parent could do. The mom that stays at home and has nothing to do, have a mom's group where they can come and, you know, learn to knit or whatever that is, whatever the it factor is in your community. So I say, children, bring business.
Yeah. The other, we did a panel earlier on collaborations, and the other place I've seen success is, especially if you live in a relatively smaller town, 100,000, 50,000, something like that. But let's say there's a candle maker in your town. that you can collaborate with and you make a sweater weather candle or something like that. It's a great feel-good story to pitch to the paper of, look at these women-owned small businesses working together, you know, and we're carrying their products and they're carrying ours, and, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I mean, that's a great like Sunday read kind of thing.
Yeah, and one of the things we talked about when we were coming up with this is to talk about what is your objective. Like when you're trying to get the press, what is your objective? Are you trying to build your brand? Are you trying to get sales? So do you guys want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think there's, I guess you should think first of what you're trying to accomplish. So do you have an interesting brand story? I know Jimmy Beans, you've grown so much and acquired companies and are now moving.
It sounds really fancy because of the press that we've done,
right.
But it's really not that
Exactly.
fancy. But yeah.
Or do you want to tell the story of the businesses you work with? So if you're doing an exciting collaboration, or do you want to get press for an event that you're doing? If you're coming up with a product, and then also target the audience that you want to reach. So we were talking about local papers. Definitely don't discount them, but also do you think that your story has potential to reach like a national audience? So that you can think about gift guides too. Like if your shop has something that would be, or you could even pitch yourself kind of as an authority. So whether it be just issues related to crafting or pitching gift guides. I think that gift guides are one of those really great kind of things that we don't think about, but it's a good way to get a mention because there are magazines and other publications that are always looking for products to compile.
Blogs. Like blogs.
Oh, blogs, yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yep, all the
blogs
digital.
as well.
Yeah.
And you mentioned being an expert or a professional, and that was a route that we went years ago. So, and I mean, you're all an expert in small business. Whether it's small business success or small business failure, you're an expert in one of those two. And that's something that you can write on. And there's a lot of demand for that and a lot of need for that, even within our industry. I mean, the Craft Industry Alliance, I mean, there's people want to hear that, or a column for the paper.
Cool.
So,
did you have anything, Sandra, to add to that? Okay. So we also, let's talk about reaching out. Like, where do you find contacts? Like, how do you find people to approach?
So I think, firstly, for me, growing my brand, I first start as close as I can myself. So everybody knows, like, I feel like I'm my best friend. I don't know about you. Like, I can tell my story better than anybody else can tell my story.
Right.
So when I go on social media, when I'm out at a conference, when I'm anywhere, I am my brand. So even if you're going to the grocery store, I know it sounds terrible, but my brain is always thinking, how can I take this moment? How can I, what is it about where I'm at that I can promote, educate? I look at it as a pipeline.
yeah.
It's either, am I promoting, educating, informing, or am I bringing in information? Is somebody telling me something that I need to know? So there's always these categories that I'm thinking of. But first thing is, you're your best brand. If you're not wearing something or have something that you're selling in your shop, shame on you. You should have it on you all the time. I came here to this conference from another conference, and the other conference, I didn't need any of my quilts, but I threw one in, and now it's sitting in a boot because they needed a quilt. Because I was like, wait a minute, I'm known for my denim quilts. Nope, I'm throwing one in. So when you're out and about, even when you're going to the grocery store, have something that you've knitted, have something that you sell at your store. Because you never know where you're going to miss an opportunity.
Yep.
Laura, you talked about that, like knitting at the airport and how that led to something.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're so on the money. I mean, you just have to, I think, like, how do you make contacts? How do you create? You just hustle. I mean, you got to hustle. A really smart friend of mine said, and I'm from the South, so it was perfect, but she's like, closed mouths don't get fed. Like, I grew up in a huge apartment complex, and I literally, until I was in 5th grade and we got to move into a townhouse, would go door to door. I mean, I would just knock on every door and I'd say, what can I do for money? What can I do for money? Thank God this was like the 70s and 80s, so it was appropriate, you know? But what can I do for money? What can I do for money? You know, eventually it turned into just, can I have some money? Because I realized people would just give it to you. But it's the same thing with press. You just, hey, will you write about me? Hey, will you write about... And you can't just, like, you've got to be able to, here's my story. It's well thought out. Here's why this is going to benefit you. And even with local stories, national stories, whatever, I mean, maybe the story is on post-COVID mental health, and it's knitting and gardening and cooking. You know, it's not, it doesn't always just have to be about me, but if I could be a third of the story, that would be fantastic. So, you know, I've got the whole package put together, it's well thought out, but then you just start knocking on doors and you expect 9 out of 10 people to say no, go away, but all you need is the one. You know, I mean, how many people did you date before you finally like got married or had sex or what? Well, I'm just saying, you know, like,
it's a numbers game.
There are very few of us are married to our 3rd grade boyfriend. Or our 3rd grade girlfriend. So, and it's the same thing with press. You just keep going and keep going and kiss them and kiss them and kiss them and kiss them. Don't go any farther. You know, and eventually somebody will ask you to marry them.
Lisa, you had a suggestion about where to look, like, you know, look in your paper, right? And look for the people who look for those bylines.
Yeah, so I would say start out by reading a lot. Do your research. It also helps to get a sense of like where your ideal press would be. So, like, let's say you love reading, like you have a regional magazine, or there's a particular blog that you would love to, or even national magazine, like Real Simple or something, or a craft magazine. Read those, get a sense of who writes about what, and then when you have ideas of stories that you'd like to share, you can email that person and say, oh, I love your articles on X, Y, and Z. Here's how my story fits into what you write. Or even if you just, it's also good if you just start out by complimenting them and saying you liked something, and give instead of asking for something is also a great way to start. It's kind of a long game, but you can also forge really great relationships with people just based on shared interests. And I know, Laura, you had a great story about being at a conference and getting to know an editor at a pretty big publication, and you didn't start out asking her, hey, will you write about me? It was just you got into a conversation about knitting.
It took like years. So I'm on a podcast. There are a number of, it's called 21 Hats, and it's a number of small business owners. And to get to that point, I was a blogger for the New York Times for a couple of years. Me and 9 other small business owners throughout the country. And I got that gig because I had religiously followed that blog for years. And I'd been reading it. I knew all the characters, all the owners. I read every single article. I'm a real nerd. And I went to a conference, and a friend of mine introduced me to the editor of the blog. And the guy, his name's Lauren Feldman. And my friend Sherry's like, hey, Laura, this is Lauren. I'm like, I know who Lauren is. And I'm a bit of a spaz. I was like, oh my gosh, do you remember on November 23rd of 2011, you guys, Jay Goltz wrote about this, and he wrote about this, and then, oh my God, that one that Paul wrote about this, and I was like going on and on and on, and he was just standing there like terrified. He's just like, oh my God, who's this crazy woman? And I'm like, no, I love your blog, like I read it all the time, literally read it all the time, it's been transformative, it's really made a difference in my life, it's helped my business grow, blah, 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 blah. Long story short, he's like, maybe we could have a beer later. And so I had a beer with him, and I'm like, maybe someday I could write for you. And he's just like, yeah, okay, wacko. So I ended up writing a blog. Then I go to another conference, and it was an ink conference, and I'm sitting at a table with this woman, Kimberly, and I'm just we're chatting, and it turns out she's a knitter. And I was like, oh, somehow it came up. She was like, I'd love to have you write an article for Inc. magazine about your experience as a small business owner. So I write this article. I'm like, okay, if it includes like a photo, even better, right? So we get that done. And then I send Lauren, this is probably 2 years later, because I kept emailing him every few months. Hey, Lauren, have you forgot about me? Like, and I'd send him, this blog was great. I mean, totally pestering him. And about a year and a half later, this article in Inc. comes out, and I'm like, hey, here's just an example of my writing. Like, if one of these guys decides to shut their business down, or if there's a spot, like, I'd really love to blog for the New York Times. And it turns out he read the article that I wrote. He's like, you know what, come on board. Let's do this. So I wrote for him, and then we went to Forbes together, and me and, it's a couple, and now we're in this podcast together with me and a couple of the other guys from that. And it's really just tenacity. Yes. It's doing your homework. Yes. Because he said, so many people come up to me and they're like, oh, I love what you do. And they can't name an article. Mm-hmm. They don't know the names of the guys that are, relevant. I mean, it's just bullshit, right? So doing your homework, really, really connecting, being genuine and transparent, yes. Not being afraid to be seen as a weirdo, has helped me a lot, I think. And just being human. And then just follow through. I mean, it took years. It took a couple years. It's the long game. But I'm like, eventually it'll come around.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have similar stories. When I started out in the business and decided to go public, I was a stalker. I stalked all the people that I wanted to be like, and all the brands that I liked. I would follow them, and I would just like comment, and I was like, that's what I did. And like you said, it's knowing what they do, knowing it so well that when you do approach them. And so the first fabric company that ever sponsored me, I actually wasn't even talking about his fabrics. I was talking about his tattoos.
Even better. Yeah.
I was like, I go up to him and I said, I really like your tattoos. And I did. My sons were interested in getting tattoos, and I'm like, I like your tattoos. Now explain to me. And so we did this whole dialogue about tattoos. Nothing about quilting.
Yep.
I was at Market.
Yep.
Quilt Market. So we did this whole dialogue. We're talking, yada, yada, yada. And then I think I walked away, and I was like, yeah, and I like your fabrics too. And they were in Orange County, which is where I used to live, and it's a manufactured Hoffman fabrics.
Yep.
And later on, a year or two later, I saw him again, and I teach a quilting class. I think I was at the factory on the floor, and they do a little tour, and he yells over and says, give her anything she wants.
Yeah.
I was like, me? And that was how, again, it had nothing really, for me, it really didn't have anything to do about his quilts. There was something that interests me. You connect, because at the end of the day, people like working with people that they like and that have similar interests.
Right.
If you connect with somebody, and again, you have to do your homework. I have been teaching quilting and fabric and pattern design since the 80s. I majored in fashion design. Like, it wasn't that I came off the street and was like, okay, help me. You had done your homework. You knew what you needed to know. You just didn't have Joe that worked for the company. Right? So like you, I started at the bottom. And then as I grew, the other thing is put your stuff out there on social media. For me, what I do is I put myself out there, and whatever comes back, I feel like that's what I'm supposed to have. Mm. Whatever your store's it factor is, whatever you want to look like, put it out there on social media. People are looking. Also, like you said, with the blogs and the podcasts and stuff, I've done lectures. And, these lectures have like 100 people on them. You don't know who you're talking to. Right. And later on, they're like, yeah, I was listening to one of your lectures. And I'm always like, what did I say? Did I say the right thing? Did I offend you?
It's always like, oh. And?
Because you don't know. So if you can do some live stuff for your shops, if you want to do some Zooms, if you want to put again, the more you put out there in the atmosphere, I feel the more you're going to get back.
I like something that you just said, though, where you want to focus on what message you are trying to convey. I think that's really key, because you could just scatter yourself out there and have all this stuff, but it's not necessarily related to what you're doing. So being focused on the message that you're trying to convey, your brand, like what your passions are, that makes a lot of sense to focus on that.
I started with the book. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I started with the book Start with the why.
Start with why.
Start with why. I would tell everybody you need to read that because that makes it bigger than yarn. It makes it bigger than quilting. I've started with the why, and it's crazy how people come up to me and know what my why is.
That's so neat.
Yeah.
So please, I encourage anyone to read that book.
Well, and one of the things that you had said earlier about so narrowing your focus and narrowing like what your story is and being clear on that, and then repetition. So, you know, the rule of thumb is you have to get a message out there 7 times before people actually hear it. I tell you have to be so sick of it. Once you're so sick of it that like you just want to hide in the bathroom, that's probably the right amount of time. Like, because you're just like, God, if I have to talk about this event one more time, you're probably right. I mean,
But isn't it amazing how like you'll have put like I find this all the time. I'll have put it out in all these different places, and people will be like, "Oh, I didn't even know that you were doing that."
Exactly. And that's why you have to do it ad nauseum, just ad nauseum. You have to. At least my experience has been that we've been most successful when we do the countdown, we start the hype early, and then, you know, and we put it on a schedule. And then we get it to the point where people are like, enough already. Like, we know about the damn new needles you're sending, you know. And then we're like, perfect.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, we talked about so approaching writers. So let's talk about working with writers. So Lisa, since you are a writer, if you'd start with that, like,
Sure.
how would you suggest, like, what do writers need from us if we're going to approach them to do an article or something? What do they need?
I would definitely try to summarize, get at your why and why do they want to write about you, and provide them with just easy access to information. So bullet points are good, and getting them in touch with the right people. So if the story is about people in your shop, getting them the email addresses, following up with the person that they're trying to reach, just to make sure that that's easily facilitated. Providing them with photos, high quality images, that's important, and just making it conversational too. Like people get very nervous talking to journalists. I mean, even I do. Like when I'm approached by them. But just if you let it flow like an actual conversation, you know, those important nuggets will come out.
That's a really good point about the photos. Like, I don't know that I would have thought of that, but then you're controlling what is going out rather than letting them come and just take pictures.
Right.
You get to like set that up.
Some publications, I mean, you want to use their photographers because they employ really high quality photographers, and some people's photos, you know, press photos are really great to be able to use on your blog or on your website and social media if you share them.
But thinking about what you like, so I do every year we knit hats and donate them to our Head Start program, and so I always get the local media to come and take pictures, and so, but I'm careful about like setting up the shot. Like, could you do this? Like, I put all the hats out and like, this is what we want, so that, because they don't necessarily know what the story is that I'm trying to, if it's just that kind of like short little thing, like they might not know the story, but you know, having those bullet points, and then you're going to be able to tell the story a little bit better.
And also it's kind of also important, I mean, the writers who aren't as familiar with crafting as we are may make mistakes, you know, call a crochet hook a crochet needle. It could be a good idea to just write those out, you know, just these are some common knitting terms, and this is the difference between knitting and crochet, because I know it could be very frustrating when that gets wrong, and it's so easily, you know, it can so easily be gotten wrong because, you know, we're the experts in this. But
Any other ideas?
I do believe photos are key. When I first started out, I'm going to be transparent. My photos weren't that good. And luckily my fellow artists were like, Sandra, you may want to up your game on your photos. I thought they were okay, but clearly they weren't. And so I started looking at other people. And like you said, photos the angles. It could even just be the angle of the photo, but particularly the quality. I can look now, and I'm fortunate. I have a half sister who's a photographer, but she's in North Carolina. I live in California. I fly. I literally bring 3 suitcases worth of we shoot twice a year. I load those suitcases up.
Yeah.
And her neck and her arm is sore when I leave. Because we shoot. Because it's so, her photos versus, even if I try it, and I have a 35 millimeter, she has trained me, but I'm still an amateur.
Yeah. Does she do headshots and stuff of
She
you
does
as
everything.
well?
So every year I have headshots. So I have several headshots that I use for that whole year. She even has the lenses that she, like with knitting, she can get right up to my stitches. It's a big difference between a photo of a shawl, which looks nice, but when they can actually see up close the beautiful light, how it hits those threads, you're gonna get, because crafting is emotional. Making things, it's an you want to invoke a certain spirit, a certain feeling. And when you have good photography on your textiles, you're going to get a really good return on your investment.
Smart. Yeah, that's really smart. I'd say my experience has been as well, like ridiculous responsiveness. So when I've worked with journalists, the more, if they send me a note, I reply within 5 minutes. Even if it's just to say, hey, got your note, let me think on that, I'll get back to you in 3 hours. Because they are my most important customer of that day. And my experience has been the more responsive and more helpful. I don't send them all, I do all the homework for them. I don't just send them off and say, well, here, you can look it up yourself. I'm like, okay, here's, blah, blah, blah. And then I get repeat requests. They come back to me, or they send me off to, they recommend me to their journalist friends when there's another article that comes out. Because I try to make it as easy on them as possible. Absolutely. I don't know if that is helpful or...
Yeah. Yeah.
They have deadlines, so.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So, Sandra, can you tell me what time it is? Because I handed my phone to somebody.
4:16.
Okay, good. We've got 14 minutes. Okay. I just want to make sure we're not going over. So we also, one of the things we talked about is reaching out to similar businesses with blogs. Like, if you want to talk about that a little bit, how that would work, or what that could generate.
Yeah, I could talk about. So I launched Indie Untangled in 2014. It started off as a website and evolved from there into retail. But when I launched, I worked with a marketing person. Even though I had experience on the journalism side, at first I thought, I could totally do this myself. I know what I'm looking for, but it really helped to work with somebody else. So, and that could even be, somebody who has experience working with the media. But I made a list of places to reach out to. So, like Knitty was actually one of them. Knitty had been around for 10 years already, and they had a blog and they wrote about just different things in the yarn and knitting world. And I thought, okay, well, that's a place I can reach out to. And yeah, they wrote about me, and it got a lot of eyeballs to my new website. And then I read, I made a list of just knitting blogs. I mean, this was, 8 or so years ago, so I think the landscape has changed. But businesses also, your shops and regular businesses are encouraged to blog for SEO purposes, and it definitely, it adds a different element to your site. So you can also, and businesses are always looking for content. So targeting businesses that are similar to yours, indie dyers, if they have a blog and you work with them, or other brands that you carry in your shop, if they have a blog, or just writers that you admire, and you can reach out and with ideas, or you could write a guest post for them on a topic that you're passionate about that maybe they're interested in. Like after I had launched, there was a podcaster, A Playful Day, had a series on celebrating indie dyers, and I thought that's something I'm passionate about. Hey, can I write a guest post for you about like why I started my business, because it really aligns with what you're talking about. And I did, and it worked out, and it was a great collaboration. She wrote something for me that I ran.
I was just going to say, you could do an exchange, right? You could write something for them and they could write something for you, and you both benefit. That could be kind of fun.
Yeah.
See, I believe in collaborations always. I just had a fellow quilter who I was at a conference prior to this one, and I'm like, let's go out, let's do something. And she's like, okay, I'll make you a quilt. And I didn't even ask her. I was like, you're going to make me a quilt? And I said, yeah, well, then I'll turn it into wearable art. And it's like, so I figure her followers are going to then see us together. My followers are going to see her. It's a win-win situation. Even if you're in the same lane, I still believe that each shop has their own personality. So don't be afraid that Mary carries the same yarn you do. Mary may carry the same yarn, but you carry it on the right-hand side. She carries it on the left-hand side. The people that like it on the right-hand side go to her. The people that like it on the left-hand side go to you. Together, you're just gonna. It's like that snowball. Two little snowballs, one big snowball. It's gonna take up some room.
That can do some damage.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to collaborate with other people, other stores that may carry the same thing you do.
And that's also a great story to pitch. Two rival businesses that are working together.
Yeah.
Well, you could do a really fun like play on that, and like just totally make it like you could have the knitting Olympics in your town with your rival store, and you guys compete on something. And make that the story, and just play up the rival part of it. I mean, there's so much fun you can have with it.
Those are great ideas. Okay. And then we talked about business bloggers, like kind of similar, that it would be not necessarily like a similar business, but just people who write about business, or maybe you write an article about, a business, your business.
Yeah. For us, so I opened in 2002, and in about 2007, so for years, I kept trying to pitch stories about knitting, actually, to Family Circle. I don't even know if that magazine still exists, but, I'm trying to get product placement in Family Circle, and we didn't make any products, so it was a little weird to try to put somebody else's product with our website on it, in Family Circle, but I made it work. And for years and years and years, I kept pushing knitting, and then the light bulb went off that the story actually for us was not about knitting. The story was about our business. And when I made that transition and I started to focus more on like the business magazines and the business blogs and women-owned small businesses, going from being a from software engineering to knitting stitches or whatever, those were the stories that had a broader audience. And my math, I just figured out of all, who doesn't, in the U.S., who doesn't know somebody who knits or crochets? Like, I think pretty much everybody in the country knows someone who knits or crochets. So I kind of banked on that. I'm like, I'll just get stuff in these big, broad-reaching magazines, and hopefully pretty much everybody that reads it's going to be like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. I just read about faucets, and I read about waste, garbage disposals and blah, blah, blah. But knitting, like I didn't expect that. And my grandmother knits, or my neighbor knits, or, the woman at church knits. And figured we could build our brand kind of that way, which would be a little different than trying to get all these knitting blogs to write about us when all the other knitting stores are trying to get written about as well.
So that reminds me of the Martha Stewart story. She started out Martha Stewart, right? And she ended up Martha Stewart Living. So again, for me, I'm starting to brand myself of not just a quilter sewer, I'm like a lifestyle. So because, like you said, in a cross magazine, you're going to pick up maybe the person that doesn't read knitting, I don't know what your magazines are called, but whatever they are called.
Yeah.
They may not be reading an industry magazine. Right. So if you want to build your business and you've already targeted the people that already do it, then what I thought of is like, if I want to build my business, what about those other people? How do I reach those other people and bring them into the fold?
Yep.
So I expand, and like you said, advertising something that's not really related to knitting or sewing or whatever your craft store does. But blend those stories. Because if the bottom line is you want more eyes on your business, if you want more revenue generated, and you got to look at expendable income and where those people are and where they're going to be looking. So they're not going to just be knitters. They own a house. They have children. They have grandparents. They have, all these different things. Car magazines. How many? Look at
That's
car
my favorite.
magazines.
That's my dream. My dream.
See?
Yes. Oh.
Like car magazines. I mean, I know it
Yes.
sounds crazy.
No.
I guarantee you put something in a car magazine, you're
It's
going to
gonna
have
stand
new people.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been
I know.
wanting to research nursing magazines because I don't know about you guys, but do you have a ton of nurses who knit? Yeah, it's
Yes.
amazing. It's probably you are a nurse, former nurse who knits. But yeah, it's amazing. I don't know why so many nurses knit, but it's probably my biggest single
Yes.
notable demographic.
Yes.
Yeah.
I actually did, speaking of which, during the pandemic, through a store called not a Verb for Keep for More, another store up in San Francisco. Anyway, they were contacted by a group of nurses who wanted to do an online workshop. Nurses. And I tell you what, we banked, because they had 50 people that came to that. It was so easy. And they're like, yeah, we want to learn about this. And it was stitching that they didn't really do it. They weren't hand stitchers. They just wanted to learn. They wanted to do something collaboratively.
Right.
So that's an easy, you find a group of people that are almost like family.
Yep.
Because nurses work with those 12-hour, 24 hours, they know each other. And they had a social media, or not social media, it was a social, some person that was over their social kind of
Community manager?
yeah, events or morale or something like that. And she would find things for them to do. And it was all over the internet.
Fun.
So think about cross-merchandising, what I consider cross-merchandising, cross-marketing.
Right. And there's also that, so crafting has people have such a personal connection to crafting, and kind of one of the big ways to be successful in business is to have that personal connection with your customers, and that's just what every business owner is looking for. So being able to write or tell a story authoritatively just about how you forge a connection, create community with your customers is it's important in business. So that's a great topic to either write about yourself or have somebody who's a business writer write about.
Cool. So some of the other ideas we talked about, I think we're probably getting close to being
27, 427.
Okay, we got 3 minutes. So I'll just kind of list some of the other ideas, and then maybe we'll dive in just briefly. So you could offer to be a guest writer for the local paper. You could offer to do a monthly column for the local paper, or a magazine. TV or radio, you could offer to do monthly segments on your area of expertise, and we all have them. So something like that. The gift guides idea. So I just want to open it up quickly for questions. So we literally don't have very much time. But any questions that came up? I feel like I have so many ideas just from sitting here. I'm like, ooh.
I know. I need to write down the gift guides. I'm like, crap. We've totally forgotten spaced on that. It's not too late right now, right? Right now is kind of the time. We're getting to the edge of gift guides.
Summer.
Okay. Sorry, I got to make a note.
People like to think about the holidays when it's really
and
hot.
I think people always, if you have pets, there's, and I don't want to say gimmick, but gimmick. If you, have
Crafting
a
for
pet,
pets.
or
Like
you
a
have
shop-
a grandchild,
a
or
shop
you
dog.
have, whatever will make you stand out, your shop, your people love to know about you intimately. But I don't let them know about me intimately. I let them know about me kinda, right here. So they may think, I don't really post about my family at all, but I may post a behind the scenes. That's another, people love the behind the scenes.
Yeah, transparency.
The more show you redoing your store, or if you have a flood, or You don't want bad things happen. But when things happen or funny things happen, or you get a shipment in and you write an article about, we just got a shipment and it's got to be out in 3 hours and there's me. And you show you. I showed a picture one time of me ribbiting, and I was literally ribbiting. And I did a TikTok. I got like 5,000 people that laughed at it. And I was like, that wasn't really funny. I was really working hard. But people could relate. You want to be relatable. That's all.
Any questions from anyone?
Any good things that you guys have done that maybe you could help us? We're all ready. I'm all ready for suggestions.
Or
oh no, you guys are successful. Yeah, you guys are keeping it under wraps. That's all right. You don't want to share.
What the biggest?
Blogs.
Okay.
Well, one of the takeaways I got just from meeting
Hold on,
is.
we have one.
Oh yeah.
So, podcasts versus blogs. Blogs feel old to me. Podcasts feel old.
What are you good at?
Well, I don't know. I'm asking.
You do whatever works for you.
Yeah.
If you,
Go for it then.
then that's what you do.
Yeah.
if that's what you naturally gravitate towards, I would say, I'm a writer first. I think if I were to get into podcasts, maybe it would be with somebody, who's more adept at that, and then kind of
Can we do
following
it
their
together?
lead. What's that?
I can talk all day long.
No, we should do a podcast.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
God.
And I just went to a workshop, and a lady that makes her living doing a podcast. I went to her shop and her workshop, and she said, first of all, start with something that you're interested in.
Yeah.
She goes, because you can talk about that all day long. Don't worry about who's going to come or who's going to listen. And it doesn't have to be a podcast where you come every Wednesday. You could do a seasonal podcast. You could do, because I was thinking oh my gosh, it's a chain. That means every Tuesday I got to, or every
Becomes an
Wednesday or
obligation.
once a month. She said, no, it could be, it's Christmas time and I got something to say to somebody. And I got something to tell you guys about. So it could be a seasonal podcast.
You could start small too, right? I do weekly Facebook Lives, and I started them during the pandemic because I was trying to connect with my people who were stuck at home. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I have no idea. How am I going to do this? And now it's I have no problem filling up 20 to 30 minutes of just blah, 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 whatever. And so it's good practice. So now I feel if I wanted to do something more in depth, I've got that behind me. I've been doing it now for a year or something. And so I've got that experience. And the other thing I just wanted to say is when we met and talked about ideas, and even today, it's there's so many things that you can get press about. You just have to think about it. I feel even this, I'm oh my gosh, why didn't I invite the paper to come to that event? Why haven't I written something about the fall crawl? Oh my gosh, 36 shops around the country. Why haven't I written about that?
Right.
So it's just remembering that people will be interested, and there's all these different things that you could talk about.
Definitely.
I think it's time. Okay. Thank you so much. I want to just thank our panel. Thank you so much to Lisa and Sandra and Laura for being here.
Thank you.
And we want to thank you.
Yes, thank you for coming.